guest this evening is the music director for Symphoria, the Orchestra of Central New York, and also the music director for the West Virginia Symphony. His past credentials include the Pittsburgh Symphony, Northeast Pennsylvania Philharmonic, Syracuse Opera, Dallas Symphony, Colorado Symphony, and the Pittsburgh Youth Symphony. But wait, there's more. He has guest conducted concerts in, get this, Pittsburgh, Dallas, Seattle, Boston, Detroit, San Diego, Buffalo, Washington, D.C., El Paso, Edmonton, Charleston, Malaysia, South Korea, goodness, and many, many more. He received his artist diploma in orchestral conducting from Yale, his master's in choral conducting from Indiana University, and his bachelor's and certificate of management studies from the University of Rochester. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Eclectic Arts virtual studio, Conductor Lawrence Loh.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, Maestro. How are you doing?
I'm well. Good to see you.
Yeah, great seeing you. And again, thank you for joining me. And I can't wait to dive into this for my own reasons, for everyone else's reasons out there. So I've got tons of things to ask you in the next 26 minutes. And
sure.
We also have a short slideshow that we're going to show of you in action. So I can't wait to dive into all this. So as we were kind of talking pre-show, it sounds like things in your part of the world are kind of similar to what's going on out here in Seattle. But for the folks that aren't familiar with where you're located, can you kind of talk about where you're at and how things are going so far?
Yeah. So I'm in New York State. We live in central New York, which is the Syracuse area. There's a sort of the New York Thruway, and it's Albany from the east, and then Syracuse, and then Rochester, then Buffalo. It's sort of this these four cities spread out, and it's people are social distancing. They're slowly opening up into phase 2 right now, which means certain, like my wife volunteers at a thrift shop, and that's going to start up now, limiting customers. I mean, the same as I'm sure where you are. But we've been very careful and getting to know my family a lot because we're all together all the time. I don't know how it is for our kids. We have 2 teenagers, but they seem to be handling it pretty well, at least like from our perspective. But I'm sure they miss doing all the things that they want to do. But this is what we have to do.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the things that I've seen out here with the like the car parade graduations that have been happening for high school seniors, and I think there was even like virtual proms at one point earlier, and my heart goes out to those students because I remember for those kind of situations, like that is a big deal. And for it to have to shift to what it is, it's like, yeah, there's isn't much we can do about it in terms of safety, so that's what we do. But yeah, you do feel for them for sure.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this. I've noticed that I have a music background. I mean, not like yours, but I have a music background. For the average person, like when you say music conductor to them, they think baton, they think like wild hand gestures, and then they're not really sure exactly what the music conductor is actually doing, let alone everything else that comes along with that position. So if you could describe the job of the music conductor to the mainstream world, what would you say?
Yeah, it's so what you see at a concert is the culmination of what we worked on in rehearsals. The need for a conductor arose as the orchestras got bigger and bigger. So when the orchestras got so big that they couldn't just do it by ear, then a designated person who's not playing in the orchestra, who is through gesture, conducting, showing different things. I mean, the musicians see on their page the music, they see the notes, they see how loudly, softly, how short. But then what the conductor does is, there's so much that can't be written in the score. And there's so many different ways to interpret the same notation. So conductors are there to have a cohesive, singular voice to 80 to 100 people, and getting them to play in a way that has maximum cohesion and impact. You have to go in with your own ideas. Everyone in the orchestra has their own idea of how it's supposed to go, and so if they were all to just play their own idea, it would be cacophony. So conductor through gestures, as you were saying, we're waving our hands around, and we're confirming or or like slightly emphasizing certain things that are in the score, and making certain musical decisions about long-term arc of the music, so that when the audience gets there, they can hear, oh, this it's building to this climax, and we all know how it's going to happen because there's a person guiding the orchestra through that. Um, and then through gesture, everyone has their own kind of hand motions that and body language, facial expression, body stature, all these things go into trying to create a mood or an atmosphere. And then, there are, I'm kind of babbling about it, but like all conductors learn a basic conducting technique. And then beyond that, we are, finding our own self through those gestures, creating something that works for us.
Okay, that's I think that's something that kind of comes to mind when you're talking about that is not only are you doing everything you just said, but do you also feel that you have to have some level of leadership, I would think, too, to be the conductor, so that so the musicians can basically buy into your vision of what this piece is going to be. Is that kind of true?
Oh yeah. Yes, absolutely. One of the best characteristics of some of the great conductors that I've seen, or in my own experience, the self confidence, not being too self conscious, not worrying about how you come across. Where you just have to go after what you want. If you go in there and you have a very strong vision that and it's clear to the orchestra, filled with experts, especially Seattle Symphony. You go in there, if you don't come across as a person who has studied the score, really knows what's supposed to happen, and can execute it with confidence, then they won't, they'll stop following you. And it happens in an instant. It's like this unwritten thing where the musicians just start working towards each other rather than through the conductor. I've seen it happen. It tends to not happen with me, hopefully by now, but it's the sort of thing where I remember, when I was in Pittsburgh, I was the assistant there, the resident conductor is assisting all these great maestros that come through. And I could see week to week the ones that the orchestra can buy into and the ones that don't. And you can't just write down, this is what you do. There's this collection of leadership qualities that go into a great conductor that you have to find your own.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I kind of flash back to when I was in junior high band and playing saxophone, and when we had our normal teacher, conductor there, then most of the time you kind of believed it and bought him because he's your daily person. But for some reason, if he was off his game or picked a piece of music that we were like not feeling, then we start pushing back on him. I remember that.
Yeah,
and then
it can
sometimes
happen.
yeah, he'd actually have to stop the class when he felt it too, and kind of address all of us. Like, put your instruments down, and we're going to talk about this. And then once we kind of understood, then some of us would get on board, and then some of us wouldn't. They would still try to fight him on it.
Yeah,
like, come on, we're trying to be a team here. It doesn't sound good when your section's not doing your part and we're doing our part. So
happens with adults too, not just middle school.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So hey, let's kind of go back a little bit. When you're starting out, and I assume being a musician yourself, and when did you decide that you wanted to go after being a conductor and a music director?
Well, I didn't even think of that as an option, from the beginning. I grew up in a musical household. My mom was a violinist, and we all learned violin. I then turned to piano and then clarinet, and then those were the main instruments for me. I studied voice in undergrad and then grad school. But the idea of going into conducting, which is what I did for my majors at Indiana and then at Yale, that kind of came out of, I was first thinking that I would maybe want to be a university professor teaching music theory, analysis, something that comes naturally to me. And I remember feeling when I was at Rochester that my senior year, that it was just getting to the point where I felt like I needed more contact with people. And I was taking my first electives in conducting at that time, and it just lit, it was a spark for me. And what I loved about it is It was all the things I love about analysis, because you have to analyze the music and have your vision, but then interacting with people. I had an a cappella group at the time at Rochester. I led the men's a cappella group, and that was my first foray into that kind of leadership. And so it was that in conjunction with the spark, taking that first conducting class that gave me that first feeling that maybe this is something I might want to do.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. I was reading something probably like 2 days ago, and I'd love to get your opinion on this. Being a conductor yourself, do you feel someone can become a conductor who doesn't play an instrument? There's this whole debate going on about that.
Well, I mean, I guess the only ones that I would know about are singers who become conductors, and the voices and instruments. A really serious singer absolutely could become a conductor. I think it'd be hard to be a conductor if you didn't play in an orchestra, because you don't really know. I mean, an orchestra conductor. There are a lot of other kinds of conductors. There's wind ensemble conductors, there's choral conductors, opera conductors. There are these tracks that people kind of fall into. I kind of fell into the professional orchestra track, did a little bit of university work at University of Denver when I was in my first professional job. I had a church job at one point. Choral conducting is always something I'm interested in. But once I got into the orchestral track, that's sort of how people saw me. And that's why my career has kind of expanded in that direction. I play clarinet in orchestra, play piano in orchestra. So those are my experiences. And so I could relate to the way that I would address a musician in the orchestra, because I know how it feels to be addressed.
Right. Yeah. And for me, I again, when I even use my limited background, when I was reading this online, when they're having this debate about that topic, I was like, I couldn't really picture someone being able to do it in an orchestral setting if they don't know how to play any level of instrument on any level,
right,
and still do it.
Here's a kind of interesting thing. I think the lower the level of orchestra, the more important it is for the conductor to have like multiple instrument expertise. So if you're conducting a high school orchestra and you can't help the violins on a technical level, or say something that's helpful on a technical level to wind or brass player, percussion, I think it would be very difficult to do that. But then when you get to the level of like the kinds of orchestras that I conduct regularly, they would never need any of that kind of advice from me. They're all top of the world as far as level. And so I can then work with these musicians at this really high level where we can find greatness above, just like playing the notes perfectly. And that's one of the great joys in what I do. And it makes it so that I don't have to say to the violins, here's a good fingering for that, that spot, because they don't need that kind of advice. There's a concertmaster there. They are all experts. It's just the way it is with that kind of orchestra.
That's a really, really good point that I didn't even think about, that those pieces, when they're to that level, they already have mastered their instrument.
Oh, they're all masters. Yeah. Each one of them is a superstar.
Awesome. Hey, so let's talk a little bit, and you kind of mentioned it, maybe it was, so how did you, when you're studying choral and orchestral and conducting, how did you get involved with what you would consider your first professional job? Do you have to just audition, or you try to apprentice somewhere? How does that work?
Yep. So when I was at Yale, which was my final graduate degree, I started taking auditions that last year. I came close for the first two. And then the last one was Colorado Symphony. The conductor, Maren Alsop, who I'm sure conducted Seattle Symphony, she was the music director of that orchestra. They were looking for an associate conductor. The associate conductor conducts about 50 concerts a year. It's a really, really busy job. I applied for it. I remember sending in a video of my conducting, which was on a VHS tape at the time. And I had to dub it, the two of them.
Yeah.
Kids these days, they don't know how good they have it. So I remember doing that, finding this perfect combination of little excerpts of me conducting from, camera view towards the conductor. They want to see a variety of excerpts in about 15 minutes of footage. I sent that off to them in the preliminary round with my resume, and then they had like 200 people apply, which is very typical for conducting jobs. And then they invited 3 of us to come out there, and each one of us went out and conducted. And we talked a little bit about that confidence that you need. And each one of us had about half an hour with the orchestra, one after the other, and you have to conduct through this gauntlet of difficult pieces. And I went in there. I remember one of my earlier auditions, one of the things that really hurt me was that I watched some of the other conductors and then got really insecure. Felt like they were all great. And they're all my friends now. It's funny, it's such a small world. But I remember watching them thinking I was not good enough. And then, I went up there and crumbled in the walk to the podium. They knew that I wasn't the one, just by my insecurity. So in Colorado, I remember not watching anyone very deliberately, went up there, conducted. I had to give a speech because public speaking is a huge part of what we do. And that ended up being, all these different rounds that they needed to see. And then I got that job. So that kind of started it all.
Okay. Hey, I've got more questions, but I want to show a brief slideshow of you in action for all the folks out there.
Okay.
And just letting people know that these photos are from Larry that he provided, but the music is royalty free. So this is not something that's associated with him. I just want to be real clear about that for legal reasons. So if the Alice folks could run that slideshow for 2 minutes, that would be awesome. Nice montage of images of you doing your conducting thing, and it's a nice segue to talk about some of your pops work that you are definitely associated with, and that's what I saw you do here in Seattle with the Seattle Symphony at Ben Royal Hall. If I need to plug them,
Oh yeah.
So with these guest conducting pops gigs, let's say specifically, do they reach out to you? Is there some sort of, in between, manager does that kind of thing? Say, hey, there's these gigs in these cities during this year that you want to guest conduct. How does that work?
I think the first time that I went to Seattle, it was to conduct a concert with Chris Bodie. And I don't think that my manager at the time, my manager I signed with like shortly after that. And then everything now goes through him. So yeah, there's like an intermediary, but you don't have to have a manager to get sought after by an orchestra. But the Seattle Symphony has a great relationship with my guy, and they talk all the time. And that's why I keep getting invited back. I love that orchestra there. I'm so lucky to have such a beautiful hall and amazing orchestra with such great programming. So but it is through this manager. That's the way it works for a lot of people.
Okay. And do you personally have an interest in Star Wars and Pixar and those things?
Oh, yes. Very much. Very, very much. Like my dream as a kid would be, what if I someday got to conduct music from Star Wars, or got to just be in the same room as John Williams or whatever. And I have both of those things, got to assist John Williams. It's just, I think for a lot of people who grew up in the 70s and 80s, John Williams is the composer that is so strongly associated with a lot of our movies: Raiders of the Lost Ark, Star Wars, Superman, even Jaws, which is a little bit, I saw later, but I did conduct that with Seattle Symphony. That whole era of music is one of the reasons I'm a conductor. That sound world is something I fell in love with as a kid, and now I get to conduct these films with this amazing music, and it's like a dream come true. I mean, I know the movies so well, the prequels and the new 7, 8, 9. I know as well as people who've seen it, like 3 or 4 times, which is the way it is for me. But those original 4, 5, 6, I've seen, in the theater 13 times. I saw the first Star Wars, begging my parents. So yeah, total crazy fan.
Wow, it makes sense, because when I saw you doing the music of John Williams program here in Seattle, when you were talking to the audience, and I was listening to you, because you're rattling off details that the average person would not know about Star Wars. It wasn't like you went to the internet and just read some really quick facts. No, this guy's a fan. He knows what he's talking about, and that made it even more special, though. That when you're conducting these pieces, and when I saw you again conduct to the movies as well, said this is one of ours who's doing that. So it's got to be just incredible for you.
I love it. Thank you. Yeah, that's how I feel. I mean, it's a dream come true to do it, and I love every chance I get to do it, to do those movies.
Yeah, and just as an extra thing for those that have not don't know what I'm talking about or what we're talking about, if you're in your city and your local symphony and your local hall, they will do shows sometimes where they will show a movie like Star Wars or E.T. or Harry Potter, and then the orchestra will perform the score live as you're watching it. So if you can picture that, the first time I got a chance to do that, I was just blown away by. So like every movie needs to be like this. There needs to be a movie on the screen and a live orchestra symphony performing the score.
It's amazing.
Because, it's such a unique, powerful experience. I can't recommend it enough to anyone in any city that you're in. If you get that chance to eventually, once we're past the pandemic and everything else, to partake in that experience. It's amazing.
Yeah, they remove the music from the film. They play the voice, like the narration, the speaking, the sound effects, and then we use these scores. I brought it out just because it's conveniently here in my office, and everything is laid out here. This happens here, lightsaber here, Falcon goes through the asteroid, makes a little turn, it happens at this moment, and it all has to synchronize. And so the orchestra is just following the conductor, and the conductor has to stick to the score, and it's so fun. It's like a video game, actually.
It's a good way to put it.
In a way.
Yeah, for sure. We've got about 3 minutes, and I want to make sure that I get a chance to ask you this, because I think a lot of aspiring musicians, aspiring conductors out there would love to know, what kind of advice would you give someone who's looking to kind of follow a similar career path?
Yeah, you don't have to think about conducting too early. I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make, that they start off setting out to be a conductor. Fall in love with music. Fall in love with your instrument, become an expert at your craft, and then if you have a conducting opportunity that comes up, or a class, you can like take it, a little adventure and try it. And it's something that there's so many different paths that people can take in conducting. I rattled off a bunch earlier, but there are even more. You can conduct in a more educational setting. So that there are lots of avenues, and I was prepared to do any of them when I was starting out, having zero expectations for the kind of career that I have now, and just go along for the ride if that's your passion. You have to love music, and you have to love working with people.
That excuse me, that makes a lot of sense. And even I have kind of a similar thing for what I do with interviews, that if you don't like people and you don't love the subject matter, so what are you doing here then?
Yeah.
I've met some other interviewers when, even for me, just talking to them, it was really awkward because they were very introverted or very shy or something. And it's like, well, at some point you have to kind of come out of your shell, because it's going to make the guest feel uncomfortable. It's going to make the interview awkward, and all these kind of just snowballs. And so it's like, just be passionate about what you do and put your best foot forward at all times, and then kind of see where things start to fall for you.
Yep.
But one other thing I wanted to ask before it's like, I've got like a minute.
Yeah.
Have you been working on original scores or compositions of your own?
Not my own, although I have written some music. But I love conducting brand new music. That happens all the time. I've commissioned works. And so bringing a new piece to life is one of the great joys of what I get to do. We do a healthy amount of new music in our programming in the orchestras where I am. And it's something that's very important, because the next Beethoven is around, and they just have to be discovered.
Perfect. Well, Maestro, thank you so much for taking the time today. It was just a sheer pleasure for me to talk to you and learn from you. And again, once we're past the pandemic and we have some sort of live events, I can't wait for you to come back to the Benaroya Hall, Seattle Symphony, and I'll be right there. Maybe we can even talk in person a little bit.
Definitely. I look forward to it.
All right. Take care. Stay safe. And I'll hopefully see you down the road.
Okay. You too. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.